Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I am your host. And joining me today is a very special guest, Mr. Connor Rogers. You might recognize him from the NFL Stock Exchange. Also recently, NBC Sports Fantasy Football Happy Hour. Also recently engaged. So congrats, Connor. Thanks for joining me today. How you doing, man?
I'm good, Steven. I appreciate you having me on, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. It was a fun exchange over email. I had to get you on. Been wanting to get you on, obviously, for a little bit here, and finally we're able to make it happen. So I'm excited to dive into the draft and get some of your thoughts on this class. So first and foremost, I got to ask, just out of curiosity, what's Aaron Rodgers' watch like in New York land right now?
It's changed a lot, right? Before the McAfee appearance, it was literally like devouring my life because I do Jets pre and post game for SMY, which is the TV partner for the Jets. And obviously we wanted to react on the spot. And then, a couple other things. I do my own Jets pod Badlands, which that's a little bit more flexible. But when it felt like it was so close to decision time, we didn't know that the decision was, I want to play for the Jets. I intend to play for the Jets. The Packers intend on trading him. That was like, okay, we're going to have something big to react here.
Yeah.
Where that weekend, the weekend before he went on McAfee, I had canceled, like I was going to go out to dinner with my now fiance that Friday, canceled it. So I'll go do it Saturday. I'll be done by then. Canceled that. Like I just couldn't be that far from my apartment in case, because it's the biggest storyline for the Jets in how long. And so then when he did McAfee, it's like kind of tempered down because it's like this trade is going to get done. We have an idea of what it'll look like, or at least parameters that we think are close. And when it happens, it kind of drains some of the excitement, but It's also still like, it's going to happen.
Yeah, a little bit. I got some hammering out to do before that gets done, but I imagine that was kind of a relief. I think like the first few minutes of that where he was like, "Oh, I haven't made a decision yet. This is not decision day." You're like, "Really? Come on, what are we doing here?"
It's shocking, right? Like I expected it to go down that road where I'm like, "We're not going to get any answers," and and the Jets fans have their fear of like, what if he just retires or wants to go play in Green Bay and all the quarterbacks are gone. So the worst is to fear is behind them, and now it's just waiting for this actual trade to be hammered out, which is it just feels like it'll drag on until the draft at this point.
Yeah, certainly seems that way. So, all right, we'll move into some more casual draft talk here. I think a lot of people have said things that they don't like about this draft class, and I think we've heard about how it's not super deep and everything. So I want to kind of start on more of a positive note with you. What are some of your favorite parts or aspects of this draft class?
Well, first off, I appreciate that because it's funny. Like when you cover the draft year round, I really start next year's class, usually May of every year. And I'll have a good baseline by the end of July or August of top fives of position groups. Nothing crazy, but a baseline. And when you spend that much time on it, it does kind of stink when people are like, well, this draft sucks. Who cares?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, like there's a lot of really good football players in this draft. And it just because it doesn't have 15 bona fide stars, right? You look at like 2021's draft and how we'll always look back at that. And you're right. It's loaded at corner. It's loaded at corner. I mean, two guys can go in the top 10 and Witherspoon and Gonzalez. I think Deonte Banks and Joey Porter Jr. can go top 20. I think Cam Smith, Keely Ringo, on and on we go, can go in the first round. Like DJ Turner is in this conversation. There are so many really good, talented players at cornerback. I think offensive line actually has a lot more depth than I realized. And this happens every year. Every year when we get to this point of the year, when various analysts and teams, because offensive line work in the NFL is done heavily by the coaching staff. When the scouts scout, of course, but the offensive line coach and the assistant offensive line coach, when they watch the tape, those guys have a big voice in what offensive linemen are picked. Now you're actually getting into the nitty-gritty tape of the offensive line, and you're like, okay, like I knew about Paris Johnson, Peter Skoronski, Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright, DeJuan Jones. Like those guys are going in the first round. And like you have all these centers like John Michael Schmitz and Luke Whippler and Joe Tippmann and Steve Avila. But when you look in, a little deeper than that, there are guys like Oluwatimi from Michigan. Like he's played a lot of football and he's a really, really good player. How about Emil Ekiyor from Alabama, who's been a guard but can play center? Of course, Osiris Torrance is in that mix. It's just a lot deeper than that. So I like the corner class. I like the offensive line class. It's very deep at tight end. It's very deep at running back. I mean, there are a lot of talented players in this draft. So everybody thinks this is a bad draft. They're just saying it doesn't have the star power that they dreamed of at the top. And I think there's a little, and I work in the fantasy industry, so this isn't an insult. I think there's a little fantasy impact of when it's not a great wide receiver class that somehow turns into being a bad draft, and that's just not real football.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely part of it. This receiver class to me has a lot of value on day 2, but it doesn't have like those star guys on day 1, and that kind of impacts things there. I want to get your thoughts on that because everybody wants the Chargers to take a receiver, right? Everybody wants, Quentin Johnston or Zay Flowers or, insert receiver here. What would you make of the Chargers being in on receiver in the first round? I mean, obviously they have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, they have Josh Palmer, who they like. Is this the right class to take, wide receiver if you have, some bona fide guys already in that room?
I lean no. I really do, especially when you hold on to your day 2 draft capital, right? I believe 54 and 85. I mean, I like the depth of the wide receiver class on day 2 to get a viable starting player rather than maybe getting a tick above that caliber at 21. Honestly, and here's the thing. Wide receiver has become as important as ever in the league. Everybody wants to be 3 deep at high end 3. Everybody wants to have, a true number 1 and then really 2 number 2s. But it's the reality to live in that is very difficult to pull off, especially with the salary cap era. I think everybody, at 21, could you probably get the first wide receiver off the board? There's a chance. There really is. On the flip side of that, could you land a top flight corner? Could you continue to beef up your trenches? Yeah, I really think so. And then still get that wide receiver with your other top 60 pick, whether that's a Cedric Tillman. The problem for me is, right, and I come back to this a lot, like you brought up Zay Flowers, and I really like Zay Flowers. He's a good player. I don't know if I'm taking a small wide receiver in the top 25. And people kind of look at me and I'm like, it's become a newer thing for me. I used to fall in love with small wide receivers and overrank them like crazy. Now I look at this draft, and once again, I really like Zay Flowers. But if I like that kind of wide receiver, why am I just not trying to get Josh Downs, Tank Dell, Marvin Mims later? Like honestly, especially when you have a great quarterback, you trust in your play calling, you believe in the skill talent around this wide receiver. Let's assume Eckler's back. They figure it out. Like, I don't know. I don't really lean that way. And if you're going to do it, as much as I don't like Quentin Johnston as a top 21 selection, at least taking him is showing that, like, okay, this was the bigger X kind of guy we wanted. So that's why we took him here. I understand the actual process of that rather than taking a guy that could be replicated on day 2.
Yeah, I think that to me is the biggest differentiating factor, right? Because Quentin Johnston, I mean, he came in at 6'2.5", I think it was at the combine.
Yeah.
But he has all of those physical traits to potentially become a wide receiver 1. And I think that separates him in this class. And I think, for me, there's not much of a difference, like you're saying, between taking Zay Flowers, Jalen Hyatt. Jalen Hyatt's stock is kind of tanked a little bit recently. But Zay versus Marvin Mims or like Tyler Scott, like I just, there's no difference for me for the Chargers. Like I think that does the same thing. I like people will want to take Zay Flowers at 21 and feed him 10 targets, but it's like you have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Austin Eckler and Gerald Everett and all these guys, Josh Palmer. Like you just don't have the targets for.
You're not looking for a hero. 21. You don't need one. Right. Yeah. So I'm with you. I mean, if you get a complimentary role player that serves as your wide receiver 3, but like, is he even that when you look at Eckler's targets, like you said, the tight end targets on the table? I mean, sure, you want to protect yourself against wide receiver injury, especially the Chargers who have dealt with that plenty, but I don't know. I try to rank the players the way I can. And then when I go into the team lens, like we are right now for the Chargers, and I'm guilty of this. I remember on Stock Exchange, I took Hyatt once and I felt really boxed into a corner where I didn't really like how the board fell on that mock draft. And that was pre-combine. A lot has changed for Hyatt. The weight's not great. He didn't run as well as you'd hoped. He ran well, but not great. There's a lot of various reasons that you can't even get into. I just don't really think he's a first-round wide receiver because the combine was really going to be his calling card, and it didn't go as great as it should have. Where I just look at it for the Chargers and like, maybe Cedric Tillman in the second round. He's a big-bodied wide receiver that can really handle the outside. And and I'd be curious your thoughts of like when you get away from the wide receiver conversation at round 1, what are the pivot points that the fan base often gravitate to that they view as one of those high priority needs?
Well, on our show we've talked a lot about getting another pass rusher in fold, and I think I've responded
Never
on
can go
Twitter to you
wrong
guys,
with
and
that.
we'll see what happens, right? Like Nolan Smith ran a sub 4.4, like his
I think
hype
he'll
is
be
kind of
gone.
crazy right now.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts.
So like if you're talking about like Will McDonald range, like BJ Ojolari, I like those players, but at 21, that's a little rich for me. So I feel like just kind of looking at the way this draft kind of is pegged to go, they might be kind of like boxed into taking one of the tight ends. And I went to Utah. I love Dalton Kincaid. I know you're not a huge fan.
He's a good player. He's just not a player that I take in round 1.
No, I understand that. He hasn't tested yet, and I don't think he's going to test great, having watched him for 3 years. But they might get into that spot, right, where it's like, okay, Michael Mayer kind of checks a lot of boxes for us. He's a safer pick. He kind of did the same thing with Zion Johnson last year. So that might be the pick. But, you've brought up on the stock exchange kind of the cornerback market, and you had them taking Deonte Banks recently. Is this maybe a draft you trade up and go be aggressive and get, a Joey Porter or a Deonte Banks, if that's kind of what you're feeling? Because it just kind of seems like there's a drop off after 15 in terms of like premier talent in this class.
That's the tricky part. Is I think Washington looks at corner. I think the Steelers could look at corner. The Chargers are in the spot, right, where it's like, okay, well, do they get the luxury of the run? Do they get the luxury of the run that one of the big 4 makes it to them? Or do you find yourself in the Cam Smith, that kind of range, which you don't really want to drop to that tier if you're going to go corner? I think the thing that would worry me is Baltimore jumping the Chargers, because I have been on this for a while. Baltimore is all over the corner class. And at 22, like, are they just going to take the guy that's there? That's a weird way to operate and not really effective. Yeah. So if the Chargers want one of those corners, you would have to be aggressive to move up. But I don't know if I love the idea of the Chargers moving up, because I want to hold on to those day 2 picks to go back to the well at Skilltown again. So it's the classic catch-22. If you fell in love with the corner and you think you can go up and get Porter, that's something I'm probably considering. But I think it would cost a premium in this draft because everybody wants these dang corners.
Yeah. So you said top 4. So Deonte Banks is in that same conversation for you.
I think he's gotten there. Yeah. I mean, I think he's gotten there for the draft, right? I pull up my rankings right now, and I have him. Let's pull this up. So I have Banks at 30th overall and Cam Smith 28th overall, but that's not how the draft is going to go. Banks is going to go top 25, and I think he'll go before Cam. But, to have what, 5 corners in the top 30, like that's a heavy dose of corner. That's just how good this class is.
Yeah, there's a lot of dudes in this corner class. So we'll pivot away here and get to some day 2 guys before we get you out of here. You're talking about the skill player talent. Again, the Chargers could certainly target a day 1 tight end. We'll see what happens there. Maybe not in the second round. We'll see what happens. But some day 2 tight ends. Who's kind of got your eye in that regard?
I mean, I really like Tucker Kraft a lot. I really do. I just think he's going to make the jump from the FCS and be a good receiving threat, hold his own as a blocker. It feels like everything's kind of come back to reality with the tight end class. It felt like there was a time where like Luke Musgrave and Dalton Kincaid were going in the top 20, and you love their upside. With Kincaid, it's not even upside to me. Like, I know exactly what he is. He's
24. There's not much.
No, but he has great hands, maybe the best hands in the draft. He's an effective route runner. I don't think he's going to give you much in line, but he's somebody that's a polished receiving tight end with ball skills that will translate. With Musgrave, he's been hurt so much. You're just hoping that speed is for real. I think both those guys are more top of round 2. When it comes down to the draft, I don't value Musgrave that way, but I think it'll happen. I think Darnell Washington's gone. I think Michael Mayer's gone. So then you go into Tucker Kraft, Sam Laporta, guys that could do a little bit of everything, that can hold their own in line. They can really, function in that 8 to 12 yard kind of range to move the chains. So that sweet spot of still being in the top 60 with the second pick, that's where you're looking at guys like Kraft and maybe even Laporta as a round 3 option as well, when it's all said and done. But I really think those guys will be effective starters, and they kind of counter the constant argument of why you should never take a tight end in round 1,
Mhm.
unless they're kind of a freak show like Washington and Mayer, which I really think they are, and Washington in a different mold. But it's a tough position to draft in the first round.
Yeah, there's not a ton of historical precedents working out. I mean, there's
No,
fine players like you guys have talked about, like Evan Ingham is fine. Is that somebody you really draft in the first round? Hayden Hurst has become kind of like a decent tight end, but
it's a tough start.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So,
All right, last question here. Chargers will be in the market on day 3 for some defensive guys. So, who are some of your favorite defensive sleepers?
oh, day 3. Oh, man. Across the board, I mean, I'll give you one if you want to go back to the pass rush. Well, not really a sleeper because the 10-yard split at the combine just like put him on everyone's radar. But Yaya Diaby, I
Mm,
just think he was misused at Louisville. Like, I watch him play and I'm like, why are they kicking this guy in so much? And his calling card is his ability to get off the ball and
yeah,
set up speed on the outside shoulder of the tackle. And they move him in all the time. I'm like, and you know what? I always go back to this. Like, I'm not working for a college program. Like, I don't know their needs. I don't know how desperate they get at certain areas. It's easy for me to
sure.
sit here and complain because they're not catering to my needs as an evaluator. Like, it's really stupid to complain about this. So they have to win football games. I want to see
Right.
what they can do in the NFL. Diaby is someone to me that like that 10-yard is real. It's real on
Okay.
film. To get off the ball. If you throw him on the field as a pass rush specialist on passing downs, and you're like, hey, line up wide, maybe even at like a 7, and just get off the ball and turn that corner, I think he'll be a more effective player than he was in college. So that's definitely one for me. And then you always have some boring ones as well, right? Like Isaiah Foskey is kind of a boring edge to me, but he's a good player. He's a really good player. He's strong. He can hold his own in the trenches. He's got the long arm. Really, really good pursuit. He plays really, really hard. He could probably eventually be a full-time player in terms of downs 1 through 3. So, like, those are guys to me that they're, and, he's not a day 3 player, Foskey. He's definitely a day 2 player, but nobody really talks about him in that kind of light.
Sure.
Man, you look at somebody like Jartavius Martin from Illinois that tested really well. Like, he was their slot corner safety hybrid. He's
Okay.
somebody that was projected in round 5, and I think his combine might get him into round 3 or 4 at this point. Coverage skills, he could tackle. Once again, a really, really good mover, very, very competitive. Was tested in coverage. Sure, he gave up yards, but he also battled back. That's kind of the argument with Banks. So this class has players. They have a lot of weird like linebackers that are like almost dime backers that
Yep.
can
So
really
many.
help you. So many. Like Dorian Williams, I love from Tulane. He tested well. He had a big year. He found the football. He loves coverage. He's probably not going until day 3. But if you had me pick a guy that I know in nickel situations, which is really base defense, I'll say more dime situations. I need a backer on the field that can run sideline to sideline, that can flip his hips and get over on a wheel route. Like, that's Dorian Williams. And if I can get that guy on day 3, that can get you off the field, especially when you play in the AFC against Mahomes, against Burrow, on and on and on. So, yeah, I love the draft, and I find guys like this to be guys that nobody cares about until they start winning you games. And these guys are in every single draft. Good draft, great draft, bad draft. They're in every single draft.
Yeah, to your point, the 3-3-5 stuff in the Big 12
Yeah.
drives me crazy, man. I hate like Will McDonald. They put Will McDonald at nose a couple of times. Like, what are we doing?
Oh, dude, it's utterly ridiculous. It's like a mix, like a hybrid of like CFL 7-on-7. Like, I don't know. It's all over the place, and the good thing is, like, especially at PFF, we've been able to evaluate the reps that matter the most of what a team is going to ask them to do, not what they had to do in college, because, Texas Tech had a thriller against, I sound so, like a curmudgeon, but it's just, I'm not like a college football fan, right? Like I don't root for a team. I love the sport. I'm a fan of the sport, but like, so for me, I'm always looking at everything in a draft lens of like, okay, I love seeing this, but it is its own unique game. And that's what makes it special to all the college fans, but it's another layer of the draft process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree there. So, Connor, this has been great, man. Lots of great insight. Very much appreciate your time. What's coming down the line on the stock exchange that draft nerds like me can be looking forward to over the next couple of weeks?
I won't give away the full thing, but a twist to the mock drafts on Mondays, like a really big twist that because we love doing them and you got to do them, but I also don't want to just, sign, seal, deliver the same show every Monday. So we found a really unique way to make the mock drafts wildly different every single week leading up to the draft. So that's coming down the pipeline. I've been in Trevor's ear about us like not forgetting to do the quarterback rankings. We have to rank the quarterback. Somehow we never did that. So
Yeah,
I just finished up the top 7 of those and found myself a little surprised on the back end more than I initially thought. The top end, not at all. The back end, not definitely some pleasant surprises. So yeah, I mean, it will roll on, and by the time we get to the draft, we'll be pretty deep on how many players we've covered, and so it makes it so fun.
yeah, love it. Love your guys' work over there.
Thank
The
you,
Smart
man.
Exchange. You guys do some great work. Strongly encourage all of our listeners to go check them out. Dropping shows 3 times a week, I believe. So make sure and go check them out. And then if you're in the New York area, make sure and follow Connor on social media for all the New York stuff. So Connor, thanks so much for joining, man. Hope you guys have a great rest of the draft season, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Thanks so much, Stephen. We certainly will.